One afternoon, while walking through the fields, they came across a storm brewing in the distance. The clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up. She felt fear rise in her chest, but he remained calm and guided her to shelter. The way he moved with purpose and care reassured her, and she realized that she could face difficult situations because of the trust she had built in him. That evening, as they watched the storm from the shelter of the barn, she thought about the journey she had been on. The fear that had once ruled her life had transformed into hope and cautious confidence. The promise of safety and reliability that he had shown through his actions had allowed her to let go of some of the anxiety she had carried for so long. Days later, they were working together to repair a section of the fence that had been damaged by the storm. She noticed the quiet way he communicated instructions and offered guidance. She felt a deep appreciation for his patience and clarity. For the first time, she realized that trust could be nurtured through everyday actions, and that it was not about grand gestures, but about consistent care. In the following weeks, they continued to work closely together, sharing small tasks, quiet conversations, and moments of laughter. The connection they had built was no longer tentative. She could feel it in the way he respected her space, yet included her in his work and presence. She understood that she could rely on him, and that the promise he had made through his actions was real and steadfast. One evening, they sat together at the edge of the fields, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. She spoke softly about her gratitude and the changes she had felt since arriving in the town. He listened with full attention and gave a quiet nod, acknowledging her words without rush. She felt a deep sense of relief and happiness. She realized that the fear that had once ruled her interactions with others had been replaced with hope and trust. The bond they had formed was a promise in itself, built on patience, care, and consistent presence. She knew that challenges would come and uncertainties would remain, but she felt ready to face them, knowing that she was not alone. One morning, as they worked to move hay to the barn, she stumbled, and he was there in an instant to steady her. She looked into his eyes and felt a wave of certainty. The promise that had been unspoken yet deeply felt was now clear. She could rely on him, and she understood that trust could grow from actions rather than words. Over the following days, they continued to move through their lives with a sense of rhythm and understanding. She felt a new strength within herself, the courage to engage with the world, and the ability to trust someone without fear. The promise he had made through his care had become a foundation for her new life. One afternoon, she found herself alone with him near the river. The sun reflected softly on the water, and the air carried the scent of earth and grass. She spoke about her dreams for the future, and he listened quietly. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet presence of someone who had shown her what it meant to keep a promise. She realized that her fear had transformed into a cautious hope, and that the trust she had built was strong and real. The town continued its quiet life, but she felt a profound change within herself. She had discovered the possibility of trust and the meaning of a promise through his actions. The bond between them had grown beyond distance and observation into something tangible and steady. She understood that she could face the world with someone by her side who had proven through consistency and care that promises were not just words, but lived actions. In that moment, she felt the journey of fear transforming into hope, reaching its full potential. She knew that while challenges would always exist, she had found a steady presence she could rely upon in a new beginning that was built on trust, patience, and the quiet promise of a man who had shown her the true meaning of being cared for. After weeks of cautious trust and shared experiences, she began to feel that her life had changed in ways she had not expected. The town that once seemed strange and isolating now felt familiar and welcoming. She had come seeking quiet and anonymity, but had found connection and understanding. The cowboy continued to be a steady presence in her life. His actions and words had built a foundation of trust that went beyond fear and hesitation. Each day spent in the fields, tending to the animals and helping with chores, reinforced the promise he had made through his consistent care. One morning, as she walked along the trail that led to the river, she noticed him working on the fence, carefully adjusting the posts. She approached slowly and offered to help, feeling more confident than ever before. He welcomed her presence with a nod, and together they moved through the morning tasks. She noticed the ease in their interaction, the way conversation flowed without effort, and the comfort of silence when words were not necessary. That day they spoke of small things, the work, the weather, and the animals. Their conversation was natural and honest, carrying no expectation other than shared presence. She felt her heart lighter, her steps more assured, and her trust deeper than ever. As days passed, their connection strengthened. She found herself relying on his guidance when tasks were difficult and appreciating his subtle gestures of care. A morning storm forced them to seek shelter under a large oak tree. The wind blew fiercely, but he remained calm, checking to ensure she was safe and steady. She realized that the fear that had once been constant was now replaced with a quiet courage. She could face challenges because she knew she was not alone, and that his promise of protection and care was real. One afternoon, a young animal wandered too far from the barn. She panicked at first, unsure how to act. He appeared quickly, guiding the animal gently back to safety. She followed and helped as best she could, feeling a sense of partnership she had never experienced. The way he allowed her to participate without fear or judgment reinforced her understanding of trust and care. Over the next several weeks, they spent long hours together in the fields, repairing fences, tending animals, and sharing quiet conversations. She began to open up about her past, her hopes, and her fears. He listened attentively, never pressing, but always present. The patience and consistency he showed made her feel seen and understood in a way that she had longed for. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they stood by the river and watched the sky change color. She spoke softly about her journey of fear and trust. He listened quietly, his steady presence allowing her to express herself fully. She realized that the promise he had made was not just about protection, but about creating a space where she could feel safe, valued, and respected. A few days later, she stumbled on a rocky path and twisted her ankle. He was there in an instant, steadying her and guiding her back to a safe spot. His attentiveness was quiet and unobtrusive, but deeply reassuring. She understood that the promise he had made through his actions was stronger than any words could convey. Over time, she noticed small signs of his trust in her. He asked for her input when decisions about the ranch were made, allowed her to handle tasks independently, and shared moments of personal reflection with her. She realized that trust was mutual, and that her courage had grown alongside his consistent care. One morning they found themselves working together to move hay after a strong windstorm had knocked it over. She lifted and carried bundles while he directed her quietly and carefully. The teamwork felt natural and effortless. She began to understand that partnership was not about equality and strength, but about support, patience, and shared effort. Over the following days, she reflected on her journey. The fear that had once dominated her life was now tempered by trust, understanding, and connection. She realized that the promise she had longed for had been fulfilled. It's not by a single declaration, but through countless small acts of care, attention, and consistency. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope. In the evenings, they often walked along the trails, watching the sun set and speaking in soft voices about the world around them. She began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known before. The cowboy remained patient, steady, and attentive, allowing her to move at her own pace. The bond they shared was built on actions rather than words, and trust rather than expectation. One afternoon, they came across a section of fence that had been damaged by the elements. They worked together methodically, sharing the labor and occasionally exchanging words of encouragement. She felt a sense of satisfaction and partnership that strengthened her confidence and reinforced the trust between them. Over the next few weeks, they continued to share tasks, quiet moments, and simple conversations. She found herself laughing more, speaking more openly, and feeling more secure in the world around her. She realized that the promise of trust, patience, and care had become a living part of her life. She had never imagined leaving the city behind, but after months of sleepless nights and days filled with noise and worry, she found herself on a long, dusty road, heading toward a small town she barely knew. Her heart was heavy with memories she wanted to forget, and a hope she clung to that maybe here she could start again. The car she had borrowed rattled as it made its way through the open fields, and she kept her eyes on the horizon, trying not to think about the past that followed her like a shadow. She had a small bag with just a few clothes, a few books, and some photographs she had kept hidden from everyone else. This town was quiet, peaceful, and untouched in ways she had forgotten city life could never be. There were fields stretching far and wide, fences marking the boundaries of farms and ranches, and a sky that seemed endless and forgiving. She felt a strange mix of fear and relief as the town came into view. Small wooden houses lined the main street. A tiny general store stood at the corner, and there was a diner with a faded sign swinging slowly in the wind. She parked the car near the old gas station and stepped out, taking in the smell of fresh earth and the faint scent of livestock. She had never lived in a place like this before, and her heart raced at the thought of starting over with no one to rely on but herself. She took a deep breath and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. Her first steps on the gravel path felt heavier than they should have, and she found herself glancing around as if expecting someone to appear and question why she was here. She had learned early in life that strangers were rarely kind, and her fear of people ran deep. But she reminded herself that she had come to this town to be invisible, to start fresh. As she walked toward the small inn she had booked, she noticed a figure in the distance. He was leaning against the fence of a nearby ranch, watching the sky with a calmness that made her pause. He wore a hat that shaded most of his face, and a simple shirt tucked into worn jeans that spoke of long hours of hard work. The sight of him made her heart beat faster, not from attraction but from a sudden spike of anxiety. He was a stranger, and he belonged to this place in a way she never had. She hurried past, keeping her gaze forward and feeling the weight of her bag pull at her shoulder. Inside the inn, she checked in quietly and took a room with a view of the fields. The sun was dipping low and painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of the jumble of feelings inside her. Fear, worry, hope, and exhaustion mingled together, leaving her restless. She looked out the window and could see the cowboy still in the distance. Moving slowly along the fence line, his posture relaxed, yet confident. She did not know why he made her feel uneasy, but every instinct in her body told her to keep away. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders and tried to read one of the books she had brought, but her mind kept drifting to him, and the strange sense of being watched even though she knew he probably did not. No, she existed. That night she slept fitfully, dreaming of open fields and shadows that moved just out of reach. When morning came, she dressed and stepped outside to explore the town. The streets were quiet, and the townspeople nodded politely, but no one stopped to talk. She bought some groceries and found herself walking past the ranch once again. The cowboy was there tending to a horse. He led it gently and spoke to it softly, as if every word mattered. She watched from a distance, her heart thumping with curiosity and fear. She could not explain why she felt drawn to him and yet so wary. She continued her errands, trying not to look in his direction, but every time she passed the ranch, her eyes found him, and a small part of her wanted to see him smile or even glance her way. Days passed, and she fell into a routine. Visiting the small store, at the diner, and walking through the fields that surrounded the town, she began to notice small details about the cowboy without meaning to. The way he worked patiently, the way he treated the animals, the quiet respect he seemed to command without raising his voice. It made her feel something unfamiliar, a mix of admiration and wariness. She knew it was foolish to think about someone she barely knew, but the loneliness she had carried all her life made her crave even the smallest connection. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm forced her to seek shelter under a large oak tree near the edge of the fields. She watched as the cowboy appeared from the barn, running quickly to secure the animals. He did not see her at first, and she felt a pang of guilt for watching him. She wanted to call out and ask if he needed help, but her fear held her back. Instead, she stayed hidden under the tree, observing the way he worked calmly despite the pouring rain. When the storm passed, he looked up and finally noticed her standing there. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement and continued his work without a word. That simple gesture of recognition sent a shiver through her. She realized that this stranger had just acknowledged her existence and that somehow it mattered. That evening, she returned to the inn with a strange sense of anticipation. She thought about the cowboy more than she should have and wondered if her fear was unreasonable. She knew nothing about him, and yet she felt a need to understand him. Her days became a careful balance of avoiding him while observing him from a safe distance. She did not know if it was courage or curiosity that drove her, but she found herself thinking about the possibility that someone could be trustworthy, someone who could keep a promise without demanding anything in return. The town continued its slow rhythm around her, and she slowly began to adjust to the quiet life. She made small efforts to speak to the townspeople, who were friendly but cautious in their greetings. She avoided mentioning the cowboy or even thinking too much about him in front of others. Her own fears whispered that trusting anyone was dangerous. One morning she found herself walking along a path near the river when she saw him again. He was fixing a fence that had been damaged by the rain, and she paused to watch. He worked steadily and efficiently, speaking to no one, yet aware of everything around him. She felt a strange mix of admiration and fear, wishing she could be brave enough to talk to him, yet fearing the consequences of her own feelings. Weeks passed, and small incidents began to build a silent connection between them. A lost calf wandered near the road, and she saw him gently guide it back to the ranch. A child tripped near the diner, and he quietly assisted without expecting thanks. She began to notice that his actions always carried a sense of thoughtfulness that went beyond words. She still did not know him, but she began to trust in the goodness of his nature from a distance. She wondered if she would ever be able to speak to him without fear. The idea of a conversation seemed impossible, yet tantalizing. Her nights were still restless with dreams of open skies and distant figures, but the thought of him now appeared in those dreams, not as a threat, but as someone who might be a guide in this new life she was trying to build. One evening, she found herself standing at the edge of the field just as the sun was setting. He appeared at the fence line and looked in her direction. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time. A small spark of hope that maybe fear could be replaced with trust, and that perhaps a promise was possible even from a stranger. She turned back toward the inn with her heart racing and a small smile tugging at her lips. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt a little less alone and a little more ready to face whatever came next. She tried to keep herself busy in the days that followed, focusing on the small routines of the town. Each morning she would walk to the store to buy groceries, and sometimes she would stop by the diner for breakfast. The townspeople were polite, and few conversations carried beyond the ordinary greetings and small talk. She felt the quiet life was slowly giving her a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. The fields stretched endlessly, and walking through them, she could hear the wind whisper through the tall grass. One day, as she was returning from the market, she noticed the cowboy standing by the edge of the field near the river. He was watching something with careful attention, and she paused behind a tree to observe. She felt that familiar rush of curiosity mixed with fear. Her heart beat faster, but this time it was not just nervousness. She noticed the way he moved calmly and purposefully. He seemed aware of everything around him, and yet nothing appeared rushed or forced. He was guiding a young horse that had slipped in the mud, and his hands were steady and gentle. She watched as he soothed the animal and led it back toward the ranch. The sight of him taking care of another living being without any hurry or display made her feel something she had not felt in a long time. She wondered if people could really be like this in real life. Over the next few days, she found herself seeing him more often. Sometimes he was repairing a fence, other times he was tending to the garden or helping a neighbor with some heavy task. She did not approach him, but she noticed small things that told her about his character. The way he treated animals with respect, the way he spoke softly when he thought no one was listening, the way he worked hard and without complaint. It made her think that perhaps this town had more to offer than just peace. Perhaps there were people who could be trusted. One afternoon, a small emergency occurred near the diner. A child had wandered too close to the river and slipped into the water. Without thinking, she ran forward, but she was too far and too slow. The cowboy appeared almost instantly, as if he had sensed the danger. He waded into the water carefully and pulled the child to safety. The townspeople gathered around and murmurs of relief spread. She stayed back, but her eyes followed him as he made sure the child was all right. She realized that in that moment, he was more than just a figure in the fields. He was someone who cared deeply for others and acted when needed. She felt her fear of him shift slightly. She still did not know him personally, but she had seen enough to trust that he was a good person. The next morning, she saw him again, while walking along a path that led toward the outskirts of town. He was carrying a bundle of firewood toward his home and struggled a little with the weight. Without thinking, she offered to help, and he looked up at her with quiet surprise. He nodded and accepted her help. Together, they carried the wood slowly and carefully. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comfortable. She noticed how strong his hands were, yet gentle. When they reached the porch of his home, he placed the bundle down and gave her a small nod. For the first time, she felt a connection that went beyond distance and observation. That evening, she returned to the inn and thought about the encounter over and over. She realized that fear was no longer the only feeling she had toward him. There was respect and curiosity and a small spark of trust. She wondered if she could ever speak to him without fear, and if he would notice her as more than just someone passing by. Days turned into weeks, and she found small reasons to cross paths with him. Sometimes it was a question about a tool or a piece of equipment. Other times, it was simply sharing a moment under the shade of a tree. Each meeting made her feel less like a stranger in the town and more like a part of the slow rhythm of life here. She noticed small acts of kindness he performed for others without drawing attention to himself. He helped a neighbor repair a broken gate one day and carried water for an elderly woman another day. She watched from a distance, heart swelling with admiration and a growing desire to understand him better. One morning she was walking along a narrow trail that led to the river when she stumbled over a small rock and twisted her ankle. She fell to the ground in pain, trying not to cry out. She realized she could not walk back on her own. She thought of the cowboy immediately. Almost as if sensing her distress, he appeared from the other side of the field. He knelt beside her and carefully examined her ankle. Without words, he helped her to her feet and supported her as they slowly walked back to the inn. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and embarrassment, but he did not rush her or speak in a way that made her feel awkward. His quiet presence was reassuring. Once inside her room, he made sure she was settled before leaving without a word. That simple act of care left her thinking about him all night. She realized that his attention was not something she had experienced before. It was quiet, respectful, and unassuming. It made her feel safer and strangely comforted. She began to wonder about the promise of safety and trust. Could someone really care for another without asking for anything in return? The days that followed were filled with small encounters that strengthened her quiet fascination. He would glance her way when they crossed paths, sometimes with a brief nod or a small wave. She would smile to herself in response, feeling the stirrings of trust deep inside her. She continued her routines of shopping and walking through the fields, but now there was a subtle excitement that tingled whenever she thought of him. She could not explain why, but she realized she was slowly letting go of some of her fear. One afternoon the rain returned. She had learned to carry a small umbrella, but the wind caught it and blew it away. She was stranded in the open field when he appeared, hat shielding his eyes from the rain. He offered his hand and guided her toward a covered shed where they could wait out the storm. They stood silently as the rain poured around them. She could hear the sound of water hitting the roof and the soft rustle of leaves. The moment was quiet and safe, and she realized that perhaps trust was possible. She noticed how calmly he stood by her side, neither seeking attention nor speaking unnecessarily. He made her feel that it was okay to be present without hiding. That evening, she walked back to the inn with a sense of warmth she had not known in years. Her fear of strangers had begun to lessen. Her curiosity about the cowboy had grown into a quiet admiration. She wondered if he would ever speak to her directly, or if she would continue observing from a distance. She felt a strange anticipation at the thought of crossing paths again. That night, she could not sleep. Her mind wandered to the small acts of kindness she had witnessed and the quiet strength of the cowboy. She thought about how it would feel to be able to trust someone after so many years of fear. She realized that she wanted to understand him, to know the man behind the rugged appearance and quiet demeanor. The town continued its slow rhythm. Fields waved in the wind and the sun rose and set in a predictable cycle. She slowly found herself moving in harmony with this rhythm. She started noticing details in the town she had never seen before. The sound of birds in the morning, the scent of fresh bread from the diner, the laughter of children playing in the distance. And amidst all of this, she knew that the cowboy was a part of the quiet beauty of the town. She could not explain why he affected her so deeply, but she realized that he presented a possibility of trust and a new beginning. She began to hope that maybe one day she could speak to him without fear, and that he would respond with the same quiet respect she had observed in all his actions. In the following days, she allowed herself to smile more often and walk with less hesitation. The world felt less frightening and more open. She had discovered that observing kindness could soften the hardest fears, and that sometimes trust could grow slowly, like a seed nurtured by patience and careful attention. The cowboy remained a figure on the outskirts of her life, steady and calm, and she knew that their paths would cross again in ways that could change everything. She felt ready to face those encounters and hoped that her courage would grow alongside the trust she was beginning to feel. The connection between them was still fragile, unspoken, and uncertain, but it held the promise of something new. And that promise was enough to make her heart beat with a sense of possibility she had not felt. In a long time, the days became more predictable, yet more complicated as she started noticing how deeply intertwined the town was with the life of the cowboy. She could not help but follow him with her eyes whenever he appeared in her line of sight. She had learned his routines the way one might notice the patterns of the wind through the trees. He rose early to tend to the animals and worked tirelessly through the day. There was a quiet dignity in everything he did, and she admired the strength and patience he carried without any complaint. One afternoon, a misunderstanding occurred that shook her confidence in the town and reminded her why fear still lingered. While walking through the market, she overheard a few townspeople talking in hushed voices. They spoke of the cowboy in ways that made her stomach twist. They mentioned that he could be difficult to approach, and that some had seen him react sharply to those who crossed him. She felt a pang of anxiety because she had started to trust him. Yet here was the possibility that she was misjudging him. Her mind raced with doubt, but she decided to observe further before letting gossip dictate her feelings. Later that day, she found herself near the ranch when she noticed a young man teasing one of the horses. She froze, unsure if she should intervene. The cowboy appeared almost instantly, his presence calm, yet commanding. He did not raise his voice, but the young man immediately backed away. The way he handled the situation without aggression or spectacle surprised her. She realized that the rumors had exaggerated things, and that his actions were guided by care rather than anger. That evening, she returned to the inn and reflected on everything she had witnessed. She understood that trust was not about ignoring fear, but about recognizing actions that spoke louder than words. Her admiration for him deepened, but her own insecurities and past experiences continued to whisper caution. The following morning, she decided to take a walk near the river, hoping to clear her mind. She noticed that he was already there tending to the fences along the water. The sun reflected on the wet ground, and the glint in his eyes caught her attention. Without realizing it, she stepped closer, drawn by the unspoken sense of reliability and protection he seemed to radiate. He glanced up and acknowledged her presence with a small nod. The simplicity of that gesture made her heart race. She realized that she had been longing for recognition from someone who could be trusted. Her courage grew slightly, and she spoke softly, asking about the fence he was repairing. He responded in clear, measured words and explained the work patiently. She listened carefully, noticing his attention to detail and the quiet pride he took in his work. The conversation was small, but it marked a turning point. She felt that perhaps she could speak to him without fear. Over the next few days, small emergencies seemed to bring them closer. A storm threatened the town, and she saw him rushing to secure the animals and property. She tried to help in any way she could, carrying buckets of water and helping to move loose objects. He did not ask for assistance, but allowed her to be near him. In those moments, she noticed how methodical he was, how calm he remained despite the chaos. She admired him more deeply and began to feel a flicker of trust that went beyond observation. One evening after the storm had passed, she lingered near the river and noticed him sitting on a fallen log. He looked tired but satisfied with the work he had done. She approached slowly, and he gestured for her to sit beside him. They sat quietly, watching the water flow, and the sky darkened into twilight. The silence was comfortable, and spoke volumes more than any words could. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that someone could be a steady presence without intrusion or expectation. She thought of the promise she had hoped for from someone in her life and wondered if it could ever be made real. A few days later, another incident reminded her that the town could be unkind and that she had to remain cautious. A stranger came to town asking questions about her. The curiosity of others made her feel exposed and vulnerable. She retreated to the edge of the fields, unsure how to handle the situation. The cowboy appeared from behind a fence, silently guiding her toward a path that would take her out of sight. His actions were protective without drawing attention. She realized that he had understood her fear and acted to preserve her sense of safety. That moment cemented a feeling deep in her chest. She realized that promises did not always have to be spoken aloud. Sometimes actions alone were enough to demonstrate trustworthiness. That night she lay in bed thinking of the sequence of events and how her fear had slowly shifted toward a cautious hope. She understood that trust was not instant, and that it had to be earned and nurtured. She also realized that she wanted to believe in it, even if it scared her. Days turned into weeks, and their silent connection grew. She noticed the way he looked after the town quietly, his unassuming care touching the lives of those around him. She started to see him not just as a figure she observed from a distance, but as someone who could be relied upon if the need arose. Each encounter, each small gesture, reinforced the sense that she could trust him. The thought of speaking to him openly became less frightening. One afternoon, while walking along the trail that led toward the hills, she tripped and fell, scraping her hands on the rough stones. He appeared within moments, crouching beside her and helping her up without a word of scolding. He cleaned the dirt from her hands and made sure she was steady before letting her continue. She was struck by the consistency of his care. It was quiet and patient and never demanded anything in return. Her fear of strangers began to diminish further, replaced by a recognition that some people carried goodness within them that could not be seen at first glance. She started to think about her own past and the walls she had built to protect herself. She realized that she had been afraid for so long that she had forgotten how it felt to let someone in, even in small ways. The cowboy had shown her, through actions, that trust could be given slowly and gently. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found herself standing at the fence where he often worked. He was adjusting a gate and noticed her watching. He gave her a brief nod and a small smile. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried a weight of reassurance. She felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling of being seen and considered. She realized that fear did not have to dominate her interactions. She could choose to see the intentions behind actions and allow herself to hope. In the following days, she began to speak to him more often. Small words exchanged while walking along the trails or while observing the animals. Conversations that were tentative, but filled with honesty and attentiveness. She noticed the subtle ways he listened and responded, showing interest without intrusion. She felt herself relaxing in his presence, the tension of constant vigilance lifting slowly. The town continued its quiet rhythm, but her inner world had changed. She had begun to see a path where fear could be replaced with understanding. The cowboy remained patient and consistent, never pushing her, but always present when needed. She started to understand that trust, connection were built over time through actions and consistency rather than words alone. One morning she awoke to the sound of birds and sunlight streaming through the window. She felt a renewed sense of hope. The thought of the cowboy brought a sense of security that she had not known before. She realized that her fear was giving way to cautious anticipation. She could see the possibility of a new beginning and the chance to let someone in without losing herself. She walked to the fields and noticed him tending to the horses. Their eyes met, and this time she did not look away. He gave a small nod and she returned it with a quiet smile. In that brief exchange she felt the depth of the promise she had longed for. The promise of safety, patience, and trust, unspoken yet felt deeply. She knew that the journey ahead would still hold challenges, but she felt ready to face them with someone who had already shown that he could be relied upon. And in that moment, she understood that fear did not have to control her, and that even strangers could become anchors in the life. She was slowly rebuilding, The days that followed felt different to her. The fear that had once gripped her heart began to loosen as she noticed more about the cowboy. There was a quiet strength in the way he moved and the way he cared for the world around him. She watched him tend the horses, fix fences, and help neighbors in ways that were small but meaningful. Each time she saw him act without expecting recognition, she felt her own walls slowly begin to crumble. She tried to find ways to be near him without drawing too much attention. Sometimes it was carrying water to the barn, other times it was helping with fallen branches after a storm. He did not ask for help but allowed her to participate, letting her feel useful without feeling imposed upon. Their conversations were still few, but they had begun. Simple exchanges about the weather, the animals, and the work that needed to be done. Each word carried a weight because it was chosen carefully and spoken without rush. She noticed the patience in his voice, and the way he seemed to listen, not just to her words, but to her hesitations and pauses. One afternoon, a neighbor's barn caught fire. Smoke and flames reached high into the sky, and people gathered, unsure how to respond. The cowboy was the first to rush toward the danger, moving with calm urgency. She followed from a distance, her heart racing, unsure if she should intervene or stay safe. He directed others with quiet authority and worked quickly to contain the fire. She watched him pour water and clear debris, keeping everyone else safe. The entire scene was chaotic, but he remained a steady presence, unshaken by the panic around him. After the fire was controlled, he walked toward her, checking to make sure she had stayed out of harm. She felt a deep sense of trust in that moment. Realizing that he would act to protect others without needing praise or recognition, the incident made her think about the meaning of promises. She had longed for someone to keep a promise to her, but now she understood that sometimes promises were shown through actions rather than words. She began to feel that perhaps she could rely on him, even if she had only known him for a short while. Days later, she found herself injured while climbing a small hill near the fields. Her ankle twisted, and she fell, her hands scraping against the rocks. Pain shot through her leg, and she realized she could not make it back alone. Almost immediately he appeared, as if sensing her distress. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight with careful steadiness. She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his presence and the reassurance of his hands guiding her. When they reached a safe spot, he did not rush her. Instead, he waited with patience, ensuring she was steady before moving on. That evening, she reflected on the small acts that had built her trust. Each one had been consistent and thoughtful, not dramatic or performative. She realized that this was the kind of promise she had longed for. It was the promise of safety, patience, and reliability. Over the following days, she allowed herself to speak more freely to him. Their conversations remained small and tentative, but they were filled with sincerity. She asked questions about the work on the ranch, the animals, and the life he had lived here. He responded with honesty, never boasting and never judging. She noticed the subtle ways he paid attention to her words, as if every thought mattered. She began to feel that he saw her for who she was, not just as a visitor. Passing through. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a broken fence, she shared a fragment of her past. She spoke quietly of her fears of trusting others and the experiences that had made her cautious. He listened intently, his gaze steady and kind. He did not interrupt or try to offer easy solutions. Instead, he simply acknowledged her words with a quiet presence that made her feel heard. That evening, she thought about how rare it was to encounter someone who would truly listen without judgment. She realized that trust was a slow process, and that it was possible to find a person who could hold space for her without expecting anything in return. Weeks passed and their bond grew. She noticed small gestures that showed thoughtfulness and care. A cup of water offered, but she seemed tired helping her carry supplies, and subtle glances that conveyed understanding without words. She began to feel that perhaps the fear that had governed her life was no longer the only force she had to obey. She could choose to engage with someone she had come to trust. One morning, a storm approached suddenly. She was caught in the open fields and the wind howled through the tall grass. She panicked and began to run, but her ankle twisted slightly again, making her stumble. From the distance, she saw him approaching. Without a word, he reached her side and guided her to a sheltered spot. The storm raged around them, but the sense of safety he provided made the fear in her chest diminish. she noticed how calmly he remained, as he checked her ankle and ensured she was comfortable. That moment reinforced the growing certainty in her heart. She could rely on him, and that reliance was not foolish. She realized that courage and trust could grow together when supported by consistent care. Days later, they found themselves walking along a trail that led toward the hills. They moved slowly and spoke rarely, but the silence was easy. She felt a quiet contentment she had not known in years. The connection between them had grown beyond mere observation. She could feel the foundation of trust that had been slowly built with every small action and interaction. She realized that she no longer flinched at his presence but instead found reassurance in it. The idea of a promise, long abstract and distant, now felt real and tangible. One afternoon she asked him a question about a task on the ranch, and he explained carefully. She listened intently and appreciated the patience and clarity with which he spoke. The simplicity of the exchange carried weight. She began to understand that trust could be nurtured through everyday moments, and that consistency was a form of promise in itself. Over the next few weeks, she found small ways to be near him and contribute, carrying supplies, tending to animals, and even preparing meals together on occasion. Each shared moment deepened the understanding between them. She noticed that he trusted her to participate, and that his quiet presence made her feel valued. She began to feel that her fear of being seen or judged was melting away. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, they stood together near the edge of the property. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, and the wind carried the scent of fresh grass. He glanced at her and gave a small nod, acknowledging her presence. She smiled softly, feeling the weight of unspoken trust between them. She realized that she could now stand near him without fear, the promise she had longed for, that someone would act with care and patience without expectation, had become real in the form of his consistent presence. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life in the town continued. She felt herself becoming part of it, moving with the quiet flow and finding meaning in small interactions. The cowboy remained a steady presence, reliable and patient, allowing her to engage with him at her own pace. She began to notice how her fear had diminished and how hope had quietly taken its place. She understood that she could let someone in without. Losing herself in that trust was a gift that grew through action and attention. As she watched him tend the animals one afternoon, she realized that the possibility of a new beginning was no longer distant. She had begun to build a connection that was both fragile and strong, tentative yet full of promise. The journey of trust and courage that she had begun was continuing, guided by small gestures, consistent care, and the quiet understanding of a man who had shown her what a promise could truly mean. The town had settled into its usual rhythm, but she felt a new sense of anticipation each morning as she moved through the fields. The fear that had once been constant had softened into a cautious hope. The cowboy remained a steady presence in her life, though nothing between them had been forced or hurried. Each day they shared small tasks on the ranch, moving in harmony with the rhythm of work and nature. She noticed the way he watched over the animals, tended the fields, and moved through life with a quiet confidence. One afternoon, a small crisis arose. A horse had become trapped in a corral and struggled to free itself. She panicked at the sight, but before she could act, he was there. He spoke gently to the animal and moved with precision, guiding it to safety. She watched closely, her admiration growing as he handled the situation without haste or fear. After the horse was safe, he turned to her and simply nodded, a small gesture that conveyed reassurance. She felt a surge of trust in that moment, realizing that his promise of care and protection was not just words but actions. In the following days, she began to feel more comfortable around him. Their conversations became slightly longer, filled with laughter and curiosity. She shared pieces of her past cautiously, and he listened with patience, never rushing or judging. She began to notice subtle gestures of thoughtfulness. A glass of water placed where she could reach it, a gentle reminder to rest. When she seemed tired, or a small smile when she succeeded at a task, each action reinforced the sense of safety and trust she had been building for weeks. One evening they walked together along the river trail. The sky was soft with the colors of sunset, and the air carried the faint scent of wet grass. She spoke about her dreams and fears quietly, the words carrying more weight than she realized. He listened with full attention, nodding occasionally and asking gentle questions. She felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. The notion of a promise returned to her thoughts. She realized that the promise he had made through his consistent presence and care was far more meaningful than any spoken vow. It was a promise built in actions small and large, steady and true. Days passed and small events continued to draw them closer. A calf wandered too far from the pen one morning and she felt panic rise in her chest. He appeared quickly and guided the animal back with calm authority. She helped where she could, and for the first time she felt that her presence was welcomed, not tolerated. The trust between them was no longer fragile, but beginning to grow into something strong. She realized that she no longer flinched when he approached, and that the nervous anticipation had been replaced by a quiet comfort. One afternoon, the town held a small gathering for a local celebration. She attended hesitantly, unsure how she would feel among so many people. He arrived and walked beside her, not speaking much, but giving her a sense of security that she had not known before. His presence made her feel less vulnerable and more confident. They helped organize small activities and cared for the animals brought along for display. She noticed the townspeople watching them, and she realized that their quiet teamwork had begun to draw respect from others. After the event was over, they walked back toward the ranch. She shared a thought about her time in the town and the changes she had felt. He listened closely and offered small observations about the strength and resilience he noticed in her. The words were simple but meaningful, and she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. The following days were filled with quiet moments that strengthened the connection between them. She found herself seeking him out when she needed guidance or support, and he offered it without expectation. She began to feel that she could rely on him in ways she had never thought possible. The fear of trusting someone began to fade as she experienced the consistency of his care. One morning she woke to find a light drizzle falling across the fields. She decided to walk and found him near the barn, adjusting the fences. She approached quietly and offered to help. He welcomed her participation with a nod, and together they worked through the morning. The rhythm of shared labor felt comfortable and safe. She realized that trust had become a natural part of her life, and that she could face challenges without fear because she knew he would act with care and integrity. Later that day, she hurt her ankle again while moving a heavy object. He appeared almost instantly to support her and guided her to a safe spot. He checked her ankle and ensured she was comfortable before leaving her to rest. The repeated actions of care and attention reinforced her understanding of what a promise truly meant. She had learned that it was not always words, but consistent presence and thoughtful action that mattered most. Weeks passed and she began to notice the small, almost invisible ways he supported her. He anticipated needs without being asked, and his patience never wavered. She started to share more of herself, opening up about her hopes and fears. Each disclosure was met with understanding and calm acceptance. She felt a sense of security that allowed her to dream about the future without the weight of constant anxiety.